The horizon was still dark when the first alarm echoed through the Essakane gold mine. A guttural siren wailed across the vast, barren landscape, its mechanical cry carrying over the desert winds. Sparks leapt like fireflies from the black mouth of the shaft, and within moments thick columns of smoke began to curl into the pre-dawn sky. The air smelled of scorched metal and burning chemicals, a sharp, suffocating scent that clung to the lungs. Shadows of panicked miners stumbled out of the tunnel, their helmets glowing faintly in the haze, their voices drowned by the roar of unseen flames below. Far away in Ouagadougou, the presidential palace stood calm and imposing, its white walls reflecting the first fragile light of morning. Captain Ibrahim Traoré gazed through his office window, hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid against the gathering storm of responsibility. At 37, he carried both the vigor of youth and the gravity of history on his shoulders. His fatigues, pressed and immaculate, gave him the air of a soldier still at war, though his battlefield had shifted from deserts and villages to boardrooms and ministries. A knock broke the silence. An aide entered, his voice urgent but steady. "Mr. President, a fire has broken out of the Essakane mine. There are confirmed casualties." The words lingered heavily in the room, but Traoré's face betrayed no alarm. Only his eyes narrowed slightly, as if instinct had already whispered that this disaster was no accident. He turned back to the window, watching the city stir awake under a sky streaked with smoke from the east. The rising sun painted the clouds blood-red, an omen of battles yet to come. The mine's fire was not merely a tragedy. It was a signal. Somewhere beneath the earth, and behind closed doors, forces were already moving to bury the truth. 3 hours later, the blades of a military helicopter churned the desert air as it descended near the sprawling Essakane complex. Dust spiraled upward, stinging eyes and coating the soldiers who stood guard. The smell of fuel mixed with the acrid residue of the fire still smoldering deep underground. Traoré stepped onto the landing pad, boots sinking slightly into the sand, his gaze fixed on the looming silhouette of the mine. Waiting for him was Pierre Dubois, the Canadian site director, tall and sunbound, his suit wrinkled in the heat. "Mr. President," he said with practiced diplomacy, "this was a tragic accident. Faulty wiring, nothing more." His outstretched hand trembled slightly as Traoré grasped it firmly. "When Burkina citizens die on Burkina soil, I do not call it an accident. I call it a matter of sovereignty," Traoré replied, his voice calm but edged with steel. As they toured the site, Traoré noticed uneasy glances exchanged between foreign supervisors. The tunnel entrance was sealed off with metal barricades, for safety reasons. Every question was met with the same rehearsed answer. Investigations were underway, reports were forthcoming, and the survivors had already been transported to the capital for specialized care. Something was wrong. Even those with minor injuries had been removed under heavy company security. Their absence left a hollow silence more telling than words. On the edge of the administrative block, Traoré's sharp eyes caught a young engineer lingering in the shadows. The man, Burkina by his complexion and accent, stepped forward nervously, clutching a folder of technical charts. As he offered the papers, his palm brushed against the president's hand, slipping a small black USB drive into it. His whisper was quick and urgent, almost swallowed by the roar of generators. Evidence. Not electrical. Chemical fire. They knew. Before Traoré could reply, 2 uniformed guards appeared, seizing the engineer by the arm. "Company property. Sensitive files." One barked, dragging him away. The man looked back only once, eyes burning with both fear and defiance. That night, inside the solitude of his palace office, Traoré inserted the drive into a secure laptop. The screen flickered, revealing internal memos stamped with foreign corporate logos. Warnings about cyanide storage. Budget slashed for safety inspections. And most damning of all, directives ordering managers to control local authorities in the event of industrial incidents. The soldiers' jaw tightened. This was no accident. It was negligence, concealed deliberately, and now the perpetrators sought to erase every trace. Outside his window, Ouagadougou glittered in restless sleep, unaware that a darker fire was spreading, one of collusion, betrayal, and foreign hands tightening their grip on his nation's lifeblood. The battlefield had shifted, but the war was the same, a struggle for sovereignty, fought not with rifles, but with secrets. The palace walls seemed to close in as midnight settled over Ouagadougou. The city outside hummed faintly, but in the presidential office silence pressed down like a weight. The USB drive lay on the desk, its secret projected onto the wall in cold blue light. Spreadsheets of hidden costs, coded emails, and maps marked with forbidden zones. Each line of evidence tightened around Ibrahim Traoré like a noose. He leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling as the questions gnawed at him. How far should he push? Could the nation endure sanctions, frozen accounts, and the storm of headlines waiting to be unleashed by foreign capitals? The International Monetary Fund would turn its back, investors would flee, and ordinary families would feel the hunger long before the men in Toronto or Paris ever lost a coin. His hand rested on a framed photograph of his parents' village, where children played barefoot on soil that hid untold riches. He thought of his grandfather, a farmer who had survived drought and colonial taxation with dignity but no wealth to pass down. Heritage called to him like a voice from the earth itself. Defend what is buried beneath our land, or betray it for comfort and illusion. Yet another voice whispered from within, the pragmatic warning of survival. He had seized power to protect his people, not to starve them in the name of ideals. His generals urged caution. His economists spoke of collapse, and foreign ambassadors offered polished threats disguised as advice. Loyalty to the nation demanded boldness, but fear for its survival urged restraint. He rose and walked toward the window, the cool night air brushing against his face. In the distance, the city lights shimmered like scattered embers, fragile and uncertain. On a nearby hill stood the monument to Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary who had once dared to speak of independence with unshakable conviction. Sankara's eyes, cast in bronze, seemed to pierce the night and meet Traoré's own. The captain whispered softly, as if confessing to the dead. "What would you do? Accept compromise or risk everything." His reflection in the glass stared back at him, stern and unyielding. He realized there was no middle path. To yield was to remain chained. To resist was to gamble with the very existence of his people. The fire at the mine had not only scorched the earth, it had ignited a reckoning in his soul. And when dawn arrived, Ibrahim Traoré knew he would no longer be judged only as a soldier or a head of state. He would be measured as a man willing to sacrifice himself so that his country might stand unbroken. The first reports broke before sunrise. International news outlets splash headlines across glowing screens. Burkina Faso suspends mining operations after fatal incident, and foreign investors alarmed by sudden crackdown. In Western capitals, television anchors spoke with clipped urgency, describing Ibrahim Traoré as unpredictable, a soldier-turned-ruler jeopardizing international stability. Commentators speculated about economic collapse, sanctions, and the danger of another resource nationalist strongman. In Toronto, shares of the mining corporation jumped, analysts praising the company's swift management of the narrative. One broadcast blamed human error by local staff for the fire, a subtle but deliberate shifting of guilt onto Burkina workers. Financial bulletins praised the corporation for ensuring production targets remained unaffected, turning tragedy into reassurance for shareholders. At the same time, the streets of Ouagadougou pulsed with a very different energy. Word spread quickly that the president had refused to accept the company's version of events. Market vendors, students, and laborers began speaking of sovereignty with renewed conviction. Chants rose in crowded squares, voices calling for justice and self-determination. Banners were unfurled with portraits of Thomas Sankara beside Ibrahim Traoré. The two figures merged in the imagination of the people as guardians of dignity. The phrase "Gold for Burkina hands" echoed through side streets and cafes. Local radio hosts debated fiercely, their microphones capturing both pride and apprehension. Farmers worried about retaliation from abroad, yet many insisted that truth was more valuable than loans or aid. In the north, where villagers had long felt the poisoned water from mining runoff, mothers said quietly that perhaps their children's suffering had finally reached the ears of those in power. Diplomatic corridors buzzed with discontent. The French ambassador requested an urgent audience, his polished courtesy concealing sharpened warnings. Canadian officials insisted that corporate investigations should proceed without government interference. Behind closed doors, representatives of the International Monetary Fund hinted that a pending loan might now be reconsidered. The clash of worlds was undeniable. In Burkina Faso, hope flickered like a flame, fragile but growing brighter. Abroad, disapproval hardened into strategy, a calculation of pressure, persuasion, and perhaps something darker. Ibrahim Traoré stood at the center of it all, a man caught between the pride of his people and the fury of powers accustomed to silence from nations like his. Every decision now was a declaration, not only of leadership but of defiance. And somewhere, beyond the cameras and speeches, those who sought to bury the evidence were already preparing their next move. The palace meeting chamber was dimly lit when the intelligence chief entered with a sealed envelope. His voice carried a weight that silenced the ministers gathered around the table. "Mr. President, we have located the missing engineer." A surge of anticipation rippled through the room. Adama Konate, the young man who had slipped the USB drive into Traoré's hand, had vanished days earlier under suspicious circumstances. Rumors swirled that he had been detained, perhaps worse. Now he was alive, hidden in a safe house at the edge of the capital. When Traoré arrived, he found Konate pale but resolute, a stack of hard drives and documents spread across the table before him. His first words cut through the air. The fire was not an accident. It was a result of deliberate negligence, covered by orders from the highest levels of the company. And there's more, much more. With trembling fingers, Konate revealed geological surveys showing that the mine extended into zones marked as off-limits because of water contamination risks. Those restricted areas were not empty wastelands. They concealed an undisclosed gold vein of staggering scale, perhaps the richest in West Africa. They had been extracting illegally for years, Konate said, his eyes burning with conviction. And they hid it from your government. They hid it from the people. The revelation sent a chill through the chamber. It explained the frantic secrecy, the foreign diplomat's sudden urgency, the media campaign painting Traoré as reckless. This was not merely about safety violations or corporate negligence. It was about a buried fortune so vast that foreign powers would risk destabilizing an entire nation to keep it in their grasp. As Konate spoke, another shock landed. Intelligence report confirmed that a group of foreign contractors, men with military backgrounds, had been intercepted near the capital. Their mission was not protection. Their orders, pieced together from encrypted transmissions, were to capture the engineer and erase the evidence permanently. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was armed, organized, and already within reach of Burkina Faso's borders. Traoré's eyes darkened as he absorbed the truth. He had thought he was confronting a corporation, perhaps a handful of opportunistic officials. In reality, he was facing an international syndicate, a network of financiers, politicians, and security firms determined to silence him and claim his country's lifeblood. The fire at Essakane had been a spark. The true inferno was only beginning. That evening, the streets of Ouagadougou swelled with restless murmurs. Families gathered around radios, shopkeepers wheeled televisions into markets, and children perched on balconies as the national broadcast began. The camera revealed Ibrahim Traoré seated at his desk, the flag of Burkina Faso draped behind him. His uniform was simple, his expression unflinching. He spoke slowly, each word measured like a blade drawn across silence. 3 of our citizens perished in flames beneath the earth. Their lives were treated as footnotes by those who seek only gold. Tonight I tell you the truth. What was called an accident was in fact a crime of greed. And those responsible wish to bury not only the evidence, but also our sovereignty. He held up the hard drive Konate had delivered, the metallic glint catching the camera's light. This contains proof of illegal extraction, environmental devastation, and deception on a global scale. They thought we would remain silent. They thought we would accept lies. They thought they could poison our soil and still own our future. For a heartbeat he paused, his hand lowering to the desk. Then he rose. Behind him the curtains were drawn wide, revealing the night city glowing with lanterns, fires, and electric bulbs. The people were already awake, already listening. Traoré's voice carried with new force. I swear before the ancestors who tilled this soil and the children who will inherit it, our land will no longer be a treasury for strangers. Our resources will serve our people. We will guard them with vigilance, and we will build with them, even if the road is long, even if the price is heavy. At that moment, the camera shifted to a crowd in the capital square. Women lifted clay water jugs high, a gesture of life reclaimed from poisoned rivers. Young men beat drums in a slow rhythm, echoing like a heartbeat through the night. Elders raised their hands toward the sky, invoking blessings. The president bowed his head briefly, as though acknowledging the unseen presence of Thomas Sankara, of freedom fighters, of miners who had died unnamed. Then he looked into the lens with a steady gaze. The fire they tried to hide has illuminated their deception. From this day forward, let the world know Burkina Faso chooses truth over fear. The screen went dark, but across the nation, chants rose like thunder, voices weaving into one refrain: pride, grief, and defiance. And somewhere, in boardrooms far away, those who had orchestrated the cover-up tightened their grip on their glasses of wine, already planning their next strike. The battle was not finished, but the vow had been spoken, and the vow would not die.